Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head down to France once again for the first time in what feels like a good little while. Now, as I've told you in previous reviews, in my experience there are some very good French craft beers out there these days, but it's not all that often that they make it outside of France, which is a little bit unfortunate. I first encountered French stuff back in about 2014. When I went on a little trip to Paris and visited La Cave Boulet, and I was really impressed with the standard. But in recent times, it seems that a few more of the breweries are starting to send their beers to other countries. So long may that continue. Hopefully we can try a few more French beers here on the channel, and I hope that you guys enjoy these reviews going forward. But yeah, for this review then, we are going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel once before. The review was quite recent. The last beer we had from these guys was a very interesting one, and for this review we are going to go to the opposite end of the spectrum. So fingers crossed it's another good beer, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to go to a little place called Vaumont, which is in the Paris region of France, and we're going to have a look at my second beer from Brasserie Popihn. So this particular beer is called the Imperial Russian Stout, Vanille, Chêne, Americain. So basically a Russian Imperial Stout with vanilla and American oak. It comes in at 12% ABV, and hopefully, as I say, this is another good beer. But the last beer that I had from these guys, I think, was just simply called Double Dry Hopped Citra Double IPA. These guys tend to name their beers systematically rather than creatively, if you like, but that was a very impressive one. I bought that one at Kiosk over in Copenhagen, and this one came from Beer Dome down in the Netherlands. So yeah, very curious to see how this one turns out. As I always say, when you're trying a new brewery, it's always a good idea to try something from the lighter end of the spectrum like an IPA, and then something from the darker end of the spectrum like a big Imperial Stout, and if you can, a lager always is good as well. And if you try these three kinds of beer, that should give you a good idea of what a brewery is all about. But these guys are very highly rated at the moment. There seems to be a few of the more modern American style craft breweries getting their beers outside of France these days, so long may that continue. But if you get the chance, I would recommend that you try some of these Brasserie Popihn beers. They're very highly rated, and the ones that I've had have been very good. So yeah, let's crack on with this review then. Really looking forward to this one. So as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done it from Brasserie Popihn before, and we will no doubt add some more to that list at some point in the near future when it's possible. There's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the French reviews that I've done for you. That's being added to whenever I get the opportunity, but not as often as I would like. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. And if you are watching from France, do let me know a good French web shop that I can use to order beers up here to Sweden. That would be absolutely awesome. But yeah, anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about Brasserie Popihn. So Brasserie Popihn, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in a little place called Vaumont, which is to the southeast of Paris, close to Troyes and Auxerre in the Bourgogne-Franche-Comté region. And if I'm pronouncing these names wrong, I do apologise. It's been a very long time since I did French at school. But this area is also known as Lyon, and there's a number of different craft breweries there these days, apparently. But the brewery itself was founded by Arnaud Popihn, whom of course it takes its name from. He founded the brewery back in 2015, and it's based in an old barn that underwent extensive renovations. But the brewery can be found on Arnaud's parents' farm, and a number of the ingredients used in the beers are actually grown on site, which is very interesting. But they began full tilt production back in 2017, and they very quickly made a name for themselves in Paris due to Arnaud's connections in the beer scene there. Over 2018, they brewed around 100,000 litres, and they began to export their beer abroad that year as well to different countries across Europe, and their reputation has been steadily growing. But they've continued to expand their capacity over the last couple of years, and as of June 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, they've produced over 150 different kinds of beer according to Untappd. They do a lot of New England hazy IPAs, they've got quite a few Imperial Stouts, and they've got a few other interesting things in there as well. But yeah, an interesting brewery, this one, and this was the first French beer that I came across here in Scandinavia in quite a little while. So yeah, or this was the first French brewery that I came across here in Scandinavia in quite a long time, I should say. Like I say, the last beer that I had from these guys, the Citra Double IPA, I found that one in Kiosk over in Copenhagen, which was really interesting. But yeah, it seems that the likes of Glassbanken.se are getting a few beers from different French breweries. We seem to be getting Piggy, Prism and Popihn quite regularly now, but I think the old Prism brewer, or the current Prism brewer, has a connection to Brasserie Popihn, of course, as well. But yeah, hopefully, as I say, we can get some more French beers from different breweries coming up here to Scandinavia over the next little while. But I do need to get down to France and visit it again. It's been a long time since I was down there, and I've not seen all that much of it. Only really Normandy and Paris and Strasbourg, actually. So yeah, I need to get down there and explore a little bit more and see what it's all about. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Brasserie Popihn for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. You can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages as well to learn more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that's it for the moment. So let's get cracking and have a taste of this beer then. So as you can see, the artwork on this one has a nice little bit of a kind of astronomical theme to it, which I really like. There you can see a lovely kind of full moon on this one, and you can also see a little bit of this mathematical stuff on the side, which is absolutely lovely. But yeah, it looks really nice. So this looks as if here it says on the side that this picture was actually taken from Vaumont in France, which is pretty cool actually. So this is a genuine picture of the moon from the brewery, I guess. But yeah, 440ml can, this one. As we mentioned at the start of the video, this one comes in at 12% ABV and a Russian Imperial Stout with vanilla and American oak chips in it. So I think this could turn out to be a little bit of a monster. I can't remember exactly what I paid for this one. I've got a feeling it might have been about €7 or something like that. And then of course we've got the postage on top of that. But yeah, definitely should be interesting, this one, but we don't really get so many French beers up here in Scandinavia, of course, and I just wanted to try something from the dark end of the spectrum from these guys too. But it also says on the side here that this one contains barley, wheat and oats, and vanilla beans, American oak chips, and then obviously hops and yeast and things like that too. But yeah, nicely presented beer, this one. 440ml can, pardon me. So yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Very curious to see what this has in store for us. So one thing to say about this beer as well is that oak chips are really interesting, because obviously when you barrel age a beer, you put it in an oak barrel, but oak chips tend to give you, they don't tend to give you the same kind of smoothness and infused flavour, if you like. They do give you a little bit, they just give you a little bit more of a kind of depth to the beer. So oak chips are a really interesting dynamic when it comes to these craft beers. It's not that often that you see oak chips used in craft beer rather than simply barrel aging things these days. So that is an interesting point to make about this one. But when I was buying this beer from Beer Dome, they had a choice of one that had chilies in it, and I'm not a great fan of chili stouts or whatever, but this one just caught my eye, a little bit more vanilla and oak chips. You can't really go wrong with that. But yeah, anyway, let's focus on the appearance of this beer. So the head has gone down a little bit, but as you could see when we poured this one, it poured with about a half finger of a frothy, I would say dark kind of tan head on this one. It looks very, very nice, but that is just starting to fade away to be a really nice kind of thin foamy layer just now, but it's going to leave a big ring around the edge of the glass. But it looks It looks absolutely great, actually. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. When this beer is 12%, of course you wouldn't expect the head to hang around all that long, but it does contain wheat, which will help head retention to a degree, and I guess that's maybe why we've got that nice kind of wispy, tufty layer on the top of this, and the kind of thicker ring around the edge of the glass. But I mean, overall it looks pretty nice, actually. So there's one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of that head there, but overall it looks pretty damn nice. In terms of the colour of this one, as you can see though, it's, you know, pretty much black as night. That's a lovely dark ebony rosewood colour. If we put the light through it, there's not even that much of a kind of Coca-Cola, Pepsi coloured edge to it. You get a little tiny hint of that just around the edge of the glass there, that kind of the edge of the glass there, that kind of sort of dark chestnutty character. But it looks it does look very, very nice, this one. So I like how that I do like how that goes together. But in terms of the colour of this beer, you know, when it comes to determining the colour of your beer, it depends on 1, the type of malts that you use. That determines the magnitude of the colour. 2, the length of your wort boil. The more you boil the wort, the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise. Thus you get a darker colour of beer. A big imperial stout like this is going to undergo a wort boil of, you know, 4, 5, even 6 hours, something like that. Then, of course, adjuncts and barrel aging are going to play a role in determining the colour of the beer as well. But when it comes to an imperial stout, those don't tend to have all that much influence, to be honest. It's only if you use like beets or something, which I saw in a Puhasta beer recently, that you can see a little bit of a tinge to the beer. But overall, in terms of this big black ebony colour that it's got, that's exactly what you would expect, to be quite honest with you. So yeah, lovely looking beer, this one, exactly as we would expect from a big imperial stout. Yeah, nothing more really that we can say about the appearance of this one. So let's take a closer look at the aroma then, and just see how we get on. Come to think of it, I do wonder if this is my first French imperial stout. I should have checked that before I did the video, actually, but yeah, this could well be my first French imperial stout, which is an interesting thing to think about. But yeah, let's take a look at the aroma then, and just see how we get on with this one. That is nice. That is very, very nice. Yeah, could sit and smell that beer all day. So yeah, it is kind of as you would expect. You do get that nice kind of oaky, woody kind of note out of it, but it doesn't come across as, you know, sort of smooth in the same way. Well, that's maybe not right. It doesn't come across as quite as infused, I think, in the same way that you would get from a beer that is, you know, bourbon barrel aged or whatever. And the wood kind of smells a little bit cleaner in a sense as well, which is kind of interesting. You don't really have that brown sugary element to it that you'll get with bourbon barrel aging, or the kind of more roasty toasty element that you'll get with Scotch whisky barrel aging or whatever. So yeah, that's a really interesting point to make about this. If you add the wood chips into the beer, and you can do this with different things like walnut or, you know, cedar if you really wanted to. They do that with Japanese sake. The oak obviously is the most kind of popular one. Cherrywood, I think, can be quite an interesting one too. But yeah, the aroma coming out of this beer is just very, very nice. It's kind of what you'd expect. It's a big woody vanilla imperial stout, this one. That's what you notice about it right away. So when it tells you on the can, yeah, imperial Russian stout, Chêne, Americain, Vanille, it's giving you that, you know. It does as it says on the tin, which is never a bad thing. But yeah, the aroma out of this is pretty damn nice. When we're talking about a Russian imperial stout as well, you do of course expect this to lean towards the roasty, toastier end of the imperial stout spectrum, but this one comes across as very, very smooth and almost a little bit sweet, but that will be the influence of the oak and the vanilla, no question about that. But yeah, let's dive into the aroma a little bit more deeply and describe it for you a little bit more kind of succinctly. So yeah, straight away with this beer, you can smell a little bit of that kind of roasty, toasty, black malty backbone to this one. There's definitely a hint of, you know, a kind of roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust. So there will be a little bit like Special B or you know, a Carafa type malt, something like that in this beer. But the thing is, that is really infused with all these big smooth oaky notes, and it's lovely. You can really smell that big smooth oaky wood coming out of this one. As I say, it doesn't give you that kind of big infused aroma, if you like, that you would expect of bourbon barrel aging. The wood is a lot more kind of pungent in a sense, whereas with bourbon barrel aging it is more the kind of spirit that comes out of the beer. So it's really interesting in this one just to note that kind of cleanliness that you get from the oak in this beer, and that has a wee bit of vanilla in it too, but then the vanilla becomes quite pungent because you've also got the vanilla beans that have been added into this too. So that's definitely an interesting point to make about this one. So yeah, lovely, very smooth, very clean oaky characters sitting on top of that toasty Carafa Special B, I suspect at least, backbone. So toasty, well-fired stuff sitting underneath, lovely, smooth, bright oaky character in there. Then you've got the vanilla that's coming from the wood, and the more kind of oily vanilla and sweet vanilla, I would say, as well, from the vanilla beans that are added into this one. But the thing that's really interesting about this beer too is that you get a lot, I do actually get quite a bit of sweet caramel out of this one, and that's, it almost feels from the aroma that sits on top of the vanilla. So it's got this lovely bright sweet caramel to it, and just a little touch of a kind of toasty, biscuity brown sugar as well. So there's a really interesting dynamic going on with the malt base and the adjuncts in this one. In some ways this stout comes across as really quite straight shooting. Like, I don't really get any bready notes out of it, which is, I was kind of surprised about. I thought this one might have just a little bit of a bready character in there, but I do suspect we'll get a wee bit more kind of depth to the flavour of this one than we're getting out of the aroma, because if you put oak chips in and you put vanilla in this, those are quite dominating or dominant adjuncts. So that's worth bearing in mind when you smell this beer. But regardless of that, we'll find out with the flavour. The aroma of the malty, adjuncty side of this beer is very, very nice actually. So yeah, definitely leaning towards the sweeter and smoother end of the Russian Imperial Stout spectrum, in my experience. But yeah, the hoppy side of things then. Let's focus on the hops and the fruit a little bit before we taste this beer. Hoppy side of things then. So you do get a wee bit of earthiness in the back of the nose with this one. There's some nice bright floral character in there. But remember, when this is an Imperial Stout, it's not the most hoppy type of beer, of course. But you do get a little bit of the green side of the hops kind of lingering there. A bit of a floral aromatic note, as I was saying. And there is, there is just a wee touch of grassiness to this one, and it's quite a soft grassiness. I wouldn't say it's overly zesty or pungent or whatever, but yeah, soft grassiness, a little bit of a bright floral character, and a wee bit of an earthiness in the back corner, in the sort of back of the nose as well. So the slight earthiness that the beer has builds a good bridge, I think, with the kind of nice smooth oaky character that the beer has, and that's an interesting dynamic as well. On the fruity side of things then, on the fruity side of things, you get a little bit of sharpness out of this one. You do get a wee bit of that kind of raisiny note. And to be clear, because I've had people ask about this before, when we say raisins, we mean dried purple grapes. Sultanas to me are the dried, pink, white and green grapes, just to be distinct there. So this beer does have a little bit of that raisiny type quality to it. It's also got a little touch of a slightly cakey sort of fruit bread kind of thing to it, I would say, as well. So there are a few elements there is a wee bit of plum in there, but you've also got a bit of that slightly drier kind of prune as well, like a dried plum. So that's a really interesting point to make about this beer as well. Some juicy figgy notes in there, and I do get a wee bit of a kind of blackcurranty, blackberry type note out of this one. But I would say, to me, this beer comes across as quite sort of raisiny and pruny in a sense. But as I say, there's a bit of figgy quality to this one. So the fruity side of this beer is a little bit like kind of cakey or it's got a little bit of a sort of cakey, fruit bready type vibe to it, and I find that really interesting to think about with this beer as well. So yeah, the fruity side of this one comes across really really interestingly. So yeah, this is definitely worth it's definitely worth taking a it's definitely worth taking a bit of time and just thinking about that fruity side of the beer, because that is quite unique, of course. But yeah, it's a lovely smelling stout, this one. In many ways it's kind of unique, so yeah, take a bit of time and ponder that over before you have a taste of this one. But I think it is about time for us to do the tasting section of the video then. So yeah, this one is the Imperial Russian Stout, Chêne Americain Vanille, or Vanille Chêne Americain, I can forget which way around it is, but a 12% Russian Imperial Stout with American oak chips and vanilla from Brasserie Popihn in Vaumont, a little bit to the southeast of Paris. Let's get stuck into this one. Slange, Skål, Santé. Definitely cool to have some more French beers here on the channel. Cheers. Oh yeah, that's a beautiful beer, that. Quite different to what I've had from other Imperial Stouts in recent times, of course, but that is very, very nice. First thing that's going to strike you about this one is the smoothness and the way that the oak comes out in this one in a really different way to what you'll get from these barrel-aged beers, but I kind of suspected that, to be honest. It's been a long time since I've had an oak-chipped beer. The last one, I think, was one of these Mashtag beers from Brewdog or something like that, many years ago, if memory serves me correctly. Had a lot of barrel aged stuff recently, but this is lovely. So let's just say straight off the bat, I've been impressed with the New England IPA that I had from Popihn, and I'm also really impressed with this stout as well. So I think this kind of shows you these guys are a solid brewery, so definitely worth checking out. But yeah, this is my Sunday night beer, so I will be drinking all of this one myself. I've had a tiring weekend at work, so I need my post-work Imperial Stout, that's for sure. There we go. Let me just line this up again. But yeah, let's try and break down this beer for you a little bit more and describe it properly. So yeah, straight away with this beer then, you can feel, you can feel that the backbone of this beer, there is a little bit of that roasty, toasty, well-fired, bread crusty sort of thing. It's a bit smoother than I thought it would be from the aroma. I thought there'd be a little bit more of a kind of dryness to the roasty toasty qualities in this beer. And I think straight off the bat as well, we can say that overall this is one of the kind of sweeter and smoother Russian Imperial Stouts that you're going to come across. I always associate the RIS with being a kind of more bitter and more dry example of an Imperial Stout. But this one really is very, very smooth, and it sweetens up a lot the further that you go into it. So, as I say, with this beer, you do get a little bit of a roasty, toasty, bread crusty note on the backbone, but sitting on top of that, you get the oak chips out of this, and it's the oak chips really smooth it out, and the wood, as I say, it's not quite as slick with this one, but it is very, very smooth, and the wood almost just feels a little bit more green, if that makes sense. The woody flavour that you get out of this beer is a lot more green and a lot less smooth, in a sense, that you get than that you would get from a barrel aged beer. So this is the really interesting dynamic for me. So pardon me, middle third of your palate, as I say, there's a lovely kind of smoothness. There is a lovely sort of smoothness in there. Let's just talk about the layers of this beer. So backbone is a bit of a toasty, well-fired, bread crusty sort of thing, but the woody smoothness really pushes that down and sort of mellows the whole thing out, and I really like that about this beer. And within those woody flavours, you do have a little bit more. You have a little bit more of a. You've got a little bit more of a, say. You do get a little bit of a kind of green element to the to the wood as well, which is really interesting. Maybe a little bit like bark or something like this. It reminds me, in some ways, it reminds me of some of there's an old traditional style beer here in Sweden that's made with birch, and I had that from one of the breweries way up north, and it has a little bit of that kind of vibe to it. It's like a little bit of a barky green sort of thing you get out of the wood in this, and that's a really interesting dynamic with this beer. But yeah, if you go into the front half of that middle third of your palate, you get one or two little nutty undertones to this one. It comes across a little bit like almonds or walnuts, in fairness. So yeah, that's a really interesting point to make about this as well. So yeah, underneath that kind of front half of the middle third of your palate, really one or two almondy, walnutty type flavours coming out of this one. But the thing that's interesting is that on top of that woody smoothness that you have, you can feel the vanilla, and the vanilla comes across as quite oily in a sense. You can feel the vanilla. It's almost like you've got a kind of oval in that middle third of your palate where the vanilla just kind of sits. And then in the dead centre of that middle third of your palate, there's a little bit of a kind of, there's a tiny little hint of a more concentrated treacle molasses sort of thing to it. Then as you move further out from that, there's a little bit more of, there is a little bit more of a, there's a little bit more of a kind of oily, caramelly element to it as well, which I think is really nice. And as you push out towards the kind of, as you push out towards the edge of that, the extremities of your palate, it's got a little bit more of a kind of toasty, grainy, brown sugary note to it as well. But yeah, overall, this beer doesn't quite have that roasty, toasty edge that you would expect from a Russian Imperial Stout, but I think it's the oak chips kind of soaking up a lot of that, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think there's not too much else to say about that middle third of your palate, but that is where the most complex part of this beer is, in my opinion. In a lot of ways, this is quite a straight shooting beer. It's not the most complex Imperial Stout you're going to come across, but it's very nicely executed, so big thumbs up to Brasserie Popihn for this. They've done a solid job of this once again. But yeah, back third of your palate then, border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you get a little bit more of a bready build up there, so a wee bit of brown bread and a bit of a toasty bread crust, and then the base layer of that back third of your palate, you can feel a toasty bit of bread crust in there, some nice smooth brown bready elements sitting on top of that, and then you start to get the more kind of yeasty qualities coming out of the beer as well. So yeah, the back, you know, the more airy yeasty elements on the back of the beer, it feels a little bit like a kind of more airy brown bread. So yeah, base layer, toasty well fired bread crust, bit of woodiness kind of sitting on top of that, and then a bit of a kind of a more airy brown bready quality sitting in there too. The other thing that you'll notice about this beer the further you go into the aftertaste is you can feel the oats. I think the wheat comes out a little bit more as well. The further you go into the aftertaste with this beer, you will feel that layer of wheat smoothing out both on the middle third and back third of your palate, and also a bit of the thicker oaty quality there too. So that kind of sits in between. I think it sort of sits, it mixes in with the wood in the beer as well actually, which is really interesting. But yeah, so the back layer of your palate, bread crust, brown bread, wheat, then a kind of more oaty layer, then the yeast kind of sitting on top of it. So when you start at the back of your palate, the flavour kind of is a little bit taller, it condenses down as you go further forward, then into the middle third of your palate it's a little bit more sort of squashed together, and you get all these lovely kind of oak chippy flavours coming out of this one. So yeah, really interesting stuff. On the hoppy side of things, back corners of the palate, there's definitely a wee bit of earthiness in there, and that builds a good bridge with the woody flavours in this beer for sure. But as you move further forward, there's a little bit of a herbal character, and as you push towards the kind of front corners of the palate, it's definitely a little bit more sort of floral and aromatic. Then round the very front curve of the tongue, the beer is lighter and more grassy, which I can certainly appreciate as well. So yeah, the hoppy, the green component of the hops in this beer play a little bit of a role, but they're not the most prominent, if that makes sense. And when this is an Imperial Stout, of course, you can let this beer sit for a while. The hoppy character will drop out of this one. I'm not sure how long this beer had been in the warehouse or whatever at Beer Dome, but you're still getting a little bit of the hops in this one, but they come across as quite smooth. And Imperial Stout, of course, is not the most hop forward of styles either, so bear that in mind. But we should focus on the fruity elements of this beer as well, and that front third of your palate. So border region again between front third and middle third of your palate, again a little bit of a bready build up there, toasty kind of bread crusty element. Then the base of that front third of your palate, again bit of toasty bread crust underneath, the big woody notes, and then a bit of an oaty, wheaty quality, and on top of that you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. So let's focus on those. So when you take this beer in, it really has a little bit of a raisiny sort of sharpness to it. But the way that this one develops is really interesting. On the back of that front third of your palate, you do get an element of a kind of cakey, fruit bready type note to this one. So on that back half of the front third of your palate, you get a lot of pruny character out of this beer. It's got a bit of raisiny sharpness when you take it in, but it really develops to be kind of pruny and datey in a sense. And as you move further forward on the palate, it starts to become a little bit more kind of sultana like. But you know, there's a wee bit of a figgy quality to it, and then also some juicy. You also get some nice kind of juicy blackberry, kind of black curranty notes out of this one as well. So yeah, but those are on the very kind of tip of the tongue. The sort of blackberry, black curranty notes are on that very, very front tip of the palate. So yeah, I really like how this beer goes together actually in that sense. So the fruity characters in this are really dry and interesting as well, and it gives you a lot of dried fruity kind of character. So this beer for me, compared to other things I've had before, this is very, very unique. So I have to say I'm very glad that I picked this one out. I recognised the brewery, I wanted a French beer, and I kind of thought, bugger it, why not? And it's turned out to be a very nice acquisition, I should say. So this is a nice Sunday night Imperial Stout to try, of course. But yeah, let's round off the review then with the mouthfeel, and this is another interesting part of this beer too. So yeah, overall I would say that this beer is kind of bottom end of full bodied. Carbonation is quite smooth. The beer has a degree of slickness to it and smoothness, but yeah, I think it works out really interestingly for sure. It's this beer, I think, yeah, mouthfeel wise, definitely bottom end of full bodied, smooth carbonation, a degree of slickness to it, and a lot of the flavours in this one come across as being quite dried in a sense, and I think that works for it, this beer. The beer overall, I don't know if it's right to say umami, it's got a really savoury character to it. I can see this one for some people being a little bit of an acquired taste, because it's quite different from either being a big roasty toasty thing or being a smooth sweet kind of thing. It sort of goes down a more savoury route compared to other beers, and not in the sense of a pastry stout where you've got these kind of granola elements to it. It really is very, very woody, this one. And that's interesting. So this beer for me comes across as quite unique. I'm not sure if there are other breweries in France that would brew something along these lines, but this beer, the woody character really is the big thing in this one for me. So yeah, but when it comes to bitterness and things like that, I think this is probably about 60-ish IBUs. I think it's kind of sitting around that 50-60 IBUs. It's not going to blow the head off you, and that's including the malty side and the hoppy side of things. The malty and yeasty adjuncty side of the beer, like we say, is very, very smooth. There's a degree of sweetness in the malt base as well, but those woody flavours from the oak really dominate, but a bit of sweetness from some brown sugar and some vanilla as well, and maybe a little touch of sweetness from the nuts, and then you've got a really interesting fruity dynamic in this one. The fruits overall, I would say, are, yeah, they're a bit sharp in the beginning, but they're kind of smooth and juicy the further that you go into it, but they develop into a really kind of dried flavour also. But yeah, this has been a really interesting beer. As I say, my whole purpose of doing these videos was to learn about beer, and this one certainly has been a learning experience. This is very different to what I've had before, but it goes to show you the French have a relatively undiscovered and maybe unappreciated craft beer scene. So yeah, don't be scared to try some of these French beers. The stuff I tried back in 2014 was very impressive, and this is certainly a nice one as well. So yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this review. This has been a really interesting beer to try. So yeah, this one was the Imperial Russian Stout Vanille, Chêne Americain, vanilla and American oak, coming in at 12% ABV from Brasserie Popihn in Vaumont, to the southeast of Paris in France. Really interesting beer, this one, and I'm glad that I got the chance to review it. So yeah, thank you again for watching my beer reviews. Sorry this one was a little bit longer, but Sunday night I am quite tired, and when my reviews are longer, I do tend to be tired. But thank you again for watching. Check out my social media. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Brasserie Popihn. Let me know some other French breweries that I should check out. But in the meantime, it's Slàinte just now. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch you guys very, very soon. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Do check out some French beers if you get the chance, because they are very, very good. Santé.